So you're thinking about starting a podcast. I am so happy that you're here because this is what I love to talk about. So let's dive into the 7 important decisions that you need to make before you are ready to start a podcast. And let's get right to it. Hey y'all, Crystal here today, and I'm really excited because we're going to talk about some things here that we haven't necessarily covered in a lot of our previous videos. So if you've been around here for a while, you know that we love to teach you ways to help you start, launch, and market your podcast. But today, I wanted to dive into some decisions that you have to make. Yes, you, as the podcaster, as the content creator, you have to actually make some decisions before you're ready to even get started creating your podcast. So let's dive into what those decisions are here today. Decision number 1 is pretty straightforward. What is your podcast topic? This is the first thing that you have to decide before you can even start doing anything else with your podcast. Because if you just say, hey, I think I want to start a podcast, but you don't actually have a clear direction, 1, you're going to get super frustrated. 2, if you launch a podcast without clear direction, your listeners are going to get super frustrated. And 3, you're going to have a higher probability of entering podcast burnout zone, which is exactly what we are trying to avoid at all cost. So make sure that you pick a topic that is something that you're interested in, because you're literally going to be talking about it for hours and hours and hours of your life, but also that your listeners are interested in. Now, we can talk about niching down your podcast and what topics are super popular, but at the end of the day, you want to make sure that it's something you're going to be excited to sit down and record content about every single week. So the first decision you have to make is to pick your podcast topic. The second decision is picking your podcast title. Now, this is kind of one of those gray areas, right? It's not really black and white to just say, oh, here's a magic formula that I can give you that's going to give you this beautiful podcast title that's going to guarantee that you get millions of downloads and thousands of listeners as soon as you launch your podcast. No, I don't have that magic formula, and neither does anyone else. But your podcast title is very important. And I have helped many podcasters name their podcast, rename their podcast, rebrand completely, or just go along with the name that they already have for their existing business. So I want you to make a decision, and just know that if you don't love your podcast title right now, as soon as you launch, you can always change it in the future. Look at me. I did that. I had the Rookie Life podcast for more than a year before I decided to change things up and say, I think I'm going to change it to the Proffitt podcast. So it can be done. Changes can be made in the future, but you do have to make this decision before you can move forward. The third decision that you have to make is, who are your podcast listeners? Now, this is really important because a lot of people will tell me, well, I want everybody to listen to my podcast. My podcast was made for anybody that has ears and is interested in podcasting. And I'm like, is that true though? Because there's a good chance that your listeners, the people that you're trying to reach, have certain interests or hobbies, or they're already listening to podcasts that are somewhat related to the topic that you're interested in. So take out a journal or open a Google Doc, pull out the notes tab or the notes app on your phone and start writing a few ideas down. Do you want to just talk to men? Do you just want to talk to women? Do you just want to talk to business professionals? Do you want to talk to parents? Do you want to talk to people that are interested in underwater basket weaving? Yes, it is actually a thing, but you got to know this about your listeners. So take some time and make the decision. And I know that this feels kind of weird, especially if you're like, I don't know who I'm trying to talk to. I encourage you to spend a little bit more time exploring the ideal listener that you're trying to reach, because that's going to guarantee that those people are the ones listening to your podcast the day that it launches and as you continue to grow and market your show. So decide on who your listener is. You can always tweak it in the future, but you gotta start somewhere. The fourth decision that you need to make as a brand new podcaster is, what equipment and software am I going to use? Now, I want to point out something really fast, because did you notice this wasn't the very first decision that we made, right? Everyone's so concerned about equipment and software, and I gotta know which microphone to use and how am I gonna edit the thing. Yes, it is important to have good quality audio, but if you don't have your topic figured out, a good title, or even decided on who your listener is going to be, then your equipment and software won't matter as much, because you could sit down in $1 million studio and have no idea what to talk about. So I want you to put some emphasis on your equipment and software, but don't let it hold you back from moving on to the next decisions you need to make. Now, of course, you're wondering, Crystal, what do you recommend for equipment and software? So some of my favorites can actually be found in my brand new toolkit, where you can find it right here. This is the Poddy Podcast Toolkit. And in the toolkit, I'm actually sharing with you my favorite microphone, all of the equipment that I use and recommend to all of my students and members of my community. And I suggest you go grab it, because it has some of my favorites, which included my $20 microphone that I got on Amazon when I very first started. It was a plug and play microphone that was super easy to use. And then I upgraded to a USB mic that I could just plug into my computer. And now I even included my Rode Procaster microphone that I absolutely love. And then as far as software goes, I always recommend people start with Audacity. It's a very simple, free software that you can use. If I can figure out how to use Audacity, I know that you can too. But there are also some options in the Poddy People Picks, which is included in the toolkit, which is some paid versions as well as some pro level versions of software that you can try out. But you do have to make a decision, because you can't start recording until you decide on how you're going to record your podcast. So make that decision on what equipment and software you are going to use. The fifth key decision that I need you to make for your podcast is your launch date. And this is usually where people get super tense and they're like, oh wait, that means that this is real, right? Because everything up to this point you can do behind closed doors. You don't have to tell anybody about it. You don't have to share with anybody all of the recordings that you've done, or if you recorded yourself and you sounded kind of weird and you didn't love it, you don't have to share that with anybody. But announcing your launch date makes it real. It means that you're an actual podcaster, and this freaks people out. But I'm here to tell you that announcing your launch date is one of the best ways to ensure that you have listeners for your podcast whenever you actually launch your show. So I want you to pick a launch date. It could be 4 weeks from now. It could be 6 months from now. But I want you to settle on a launch date that works for you and your timeline. And then I want you to tell everybody about it. I want you to get people excited that your podcast is coming. And because you've already picked out the topic, you know the title, you know who the ideal listener is, you can share that with your audience or your potential audience if you are just getting started. But you have to pick your podcast launch date. And actually, I want you to tell me in the comments below if you already know your upcoming launch date. Will you share it with us in the comments? And maybe you even have your title and your topic and your ideal listener. Share it with us. Tell us in the comments what your podcast launch date is, the topic of your podcast, and if you have a title, even if it's one that you're like, I don't know if this is exactly what it's going to be, share with us the working title of your podcast in the comments. Okay, let's get back to the video. The next decision that I need you to make before you are ready to go out and start your podcast is where your podcast will be hosted. That's right. You have to have a podcast hosting platform in order to get it out in the world to where it's not just an audio file that lives on your computer, on your phone, on your tablet, or wherever you recorded your audio. And I'm going to tell you that BuzzSprout is my absolute favorite hosting provider. You can actually try out BuzzSprout for free for 90 days by going to crystalproffitt.com/BuzzSprout. I'm an affiliate of their platform because I believe in them so much, and I appreciate how easy they make it to upload your podcast, to monetize your show, distribute really cool visual sound bites, as well as make marketing your podcast that much easier. So make sure that you try out BuzzSprout. Again, you can go to crystalproffitt.com/BuzzSprout. But what does a hosting platform exactly do? Well, I like to say that they are where your podcast lives online. Like, think of them as your house for your podcast on the internet. And what you'll do every week whenever you completed your episodes is you'll upload your audio file into BuzzSprout. And from there, they are the ones that distribute your podcast to players like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Amazon, and all the other places where you want your podcast to show up. So you want to make sure that you choose a reliable service that you know is going to work every single week. So again, you can go check out BuzzSprout for free for 90 days. Go to crystalproffitt.com/BuzzSprout. And I hope that you make this key decision before you move on to the very last decision that you need to make before starting your podcast. The last decision that I need you to make before you start your podcast is deciding where are you going to market your show. Now, what does this mean? This means that I want you to create a plan for how you're going to talk about your podcast every single week, because it isn't just enough to create an incredible show if you're not telling people about it. It's kind of like having the best kept secret and not sharing it with anybody. I want you to have success with your show, continue to reach new listeners and grow and monetize and do all of the cool things that you can do with a podcast platform. But if you're not telling people about it, then it's going to be really hard. So I want you to get super comfortable in marketing your show. I actually have an entire playlist of videos all about how to market your podcast in ways to help you feel more comfortable with your show. So make sure that you go check out these videos after you're done watching this one. But that's all I have for you today. So make sure you go make these key decisions before you start doing all of the things for your podcast. Like, I get it. You're excited. You cannot wait to have a podcast out in the world, something that you created, something that has your voice and is sharing your important message. But I don't want you to rush into everything without having a plan. And these key decisions are a great start to getting your podcast up and running. But if this is your first time sitting here checking us out on this channel, I would love for you to hit the subscribe button where you're watching this video. Make sure you hit that thumbs up and let us know that you like this video. I would also love for you to put a comment below and tell me what other videos you want to see us create in the future. Make sure you check out these videos right here, all about podcasting and running your online business. And as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere.